Every war is fought in the shadow of past wars. Critics of the Iraq policy have compared the war in Vietnam. The White House has compared the enemy to the fascists who started World War II, though President Bush disputed that analogy today. Brian Katulis is Senior Fellow for the Center for American Progress. He joins us now live from Washington. I'm going to play what the President had to say in just a minute. But Brian, granted they've lasted about the same time, but are there any other comparisons to be made here?
With World War II?
Yes.
Well, simple fact of the matter is President Bush often brings up World War II, and there is another comparison I think we could bring up, the reconstruction of Japan and Germany after World War II. We've spent in Iraq now in the last 3 years more than $30 billion, which is double what we spent in Japan from 1946 to 1952. But I think many people would argue that we haven't achieved the results that we would have hoped in Iraq. So I think there are a lot of historical analogies that could be drawn. But ultimately, I think the situation in Iraq is quite different and much more dangerous than what we've experienced before.
Of course, it's the ideology part that all of this goes back to. The President talked about how 30 years from now, history will judge what actions were taken now. But aside from not being able to take out this group's ships or find this group on the battlefield, is the fight ideologically similar?
Well, I think in some ways the Bush administration is still groping for how it defines the ideological challenge, and I think it's difficult because they've gone through various stages where they played with, this is a global struggle against violent extremists at one point, and they're testing different language and trying to figure out how do they define the threat. And I think in Iraq it's important to remind folks that it's a civil war. It is a major internal conflict, at least 4 major internal conflicts, and we need to disaggregate that from the broader threats that we face from global terror groups.
What do you mean?
Well, essentially, if you look at the Pentagon statistics and reports coming out of Iraq, the dominant violence right now is Iraqi on Iraqi. Iraqis killing other Iraqis because they're a Shia.
It's not really a terrorist thing, the vast majority of it. It's mostly secular. It's mostly civil.
A good bit of it. I think the intelligence reports say that less than 8% of this insurgency in Iraq are foreign fighters. And this is not to say that there aren't, elements of Al-Qaeda in Iraq, but the dominant violence is Iraqi on Iraqi. And we need to start thinking about it in those terms so that we can disaggregate it and come up with the right policy solutions.
Well, when some say, when some reports indicate, including the National Intelligence Estimate and others, that the presence of the Americans there further aggravates the situation between the two parties which have fought there since long before we were a country. Is it possible that that should go into our thinking about how we continue with our forces there?
I think so. You have 16 intelligence agencies who have said that Iraq has become a rallying cry and recruitment tool for the global jihadist movement, and I think that should be a factor when we're developing our strategies. And I think the Bush administration is in a period right now where it is reassessing. It is trying to figure out how to set the policy straight. I don't think they have a clear direction just yet. They're trying to communicate some sort of change to the American public, but they're still trying to sort it out, and it's difficult because there are no good options.
Some of the detractors now say, and I guess some within his own party for that matter, that those who were choreographing this war to start out may have been misled by people of nefarious designs before the war started into thinking that what is now happening would not happen. Do you buy that now?
Well, I agree. I mean, I went to Iraq briefly in 2003 and did some work there, and I think there was a lot of talk from Ahmed Chalabi and some of the exiles who had not lived, Iraqi exiles who had not lived in the country for a long time, about how easy this was going to be. And I think, removing Saddam Hussein was a good thing, but we didn't have a clear plan to figure out the consequences of how to make sure that this instability that we're seeing today didn't result. And as a result, we're trying to come up with, better options to figure out what's the way forward. And there are no good options.
Brian Katulis from the Center, a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. Brian, good of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Coming up from B, well...